Joe Rogan has seen a lot of strange things in Hollywood, but even he couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the latest headlines about Pedro Pascal. You've heard of stage fright, social anxiety, and performance nerves. But apparently, Pedro Pascal's personal cure for anxiety involves reaching out and touching every woman within a 5-foot radius. And Joe's not buying it.
Now, speaking of sort of the post-Me Too era, so Pedro Pascal, he checks all of the woke boxes. He says all of the right things about trans because his brother is a trans woman who's now going to get some sort of TV jobs, I guess. And he's been touring around with Vanessa Kirby in expectation of the premiere of the Fantastic Four movie. And the video is super weird of what Pedro Pascal does. So he claims that he has social anxiety.
We're always holding hands when we're off carpet, by the way. So when you're thrown into a very heightened environments, we kind of are there to always remind each other that we're not alone, that we're in this together, because it's scary to go in front of cameras and do things, and it's also really, really fun. And so we are always grabbing onto one another to remind each other that we're not alone in any of it.
The story starts, as many do in the age of social media, with a few harmless-looking red carpet photos. Pedro Pascal, beloved by fans and showered with praise, is all smiles next to his co-stars. But zoom in just a little and suddenly things start looking odd. The hands. Always the hands. Sometimes on a hip, sometimes on a shoulder, other times gently clinging to someone's arm like a baby koala hanging on for dear life. And then came the excuses. It's how he handles anxiety, his defenders say. He's just nervous. Joe Rogan didn't let that one slide for a second. On his podcast, Joe threw down the gauntlet. So let me get this straight, he laughed. You're a Hollywood A-lister. You're in hit shows. You've done Star Wars. You've done Game of Thrones. You've stood in front of cameras your whole life, but you get a little nervous and suddenly it's grab a lady time? Really? The sarcasm in his voice was impossible to miss.
He's my yummy old man.
Yes. I am your cool slutty daddy.
What the hell is going on there, and how does Pedro Pascal get away with this? Which, is a little strange because actors are not typically known for having wild social anxiety, since that is a very, very social job. But he also is extremely handsy with her, and she's also extremely handsy with him.
Crushing Oberyn Martell's eyeballs.
What do you mean?
And I was so happy that people were asking for pictures with
they were doing that?
I don't understand.
And they'd be like, can I put my thumb in your eyes?
thumbs.
Because I got my eyes crushed in.
Oh,
and they were like, can it turn into a thing to put their thumbs in? And then I stopped after a redness appeared.
So the context.
And then every video of the promotional, tour that I've seen from the Fantastic Four, he's touching her belly, touching her neck, her chest, hugging her from behind on the carpet, rubbing her arm, caressing her. And in my mind, like, if my boyfriend or husband was okay with me acting like that, I can tell you for certain he doesn't care about me. And the fact that he's getting away with it.
Joe went on to compare Pedro's so-called anxiety solution to something out of a sitcom. Imagine if every time I felt awkward on stage, I just walked up and held onto someone's shoulder like it was a therapy session. People would kick me out of the building. The audience cracked up. But Joe wasn't just trying to be funny. He was pointing out something a lot of people were already thinking. The behavior wasn't being judged the way it would be if anyone else tried it. And that's where Joe really dug in. This whole anxiety thing he's pushing, Joe said, it's like a free pass. It's like saying, hey, don't mind me. I'm just emotionally connecting with everyone's personal space. Joe imitated the voice of an overly dramatic actor mid-panic attack, clutching the air like he was on stage at a high school play. Help! I'm anxious. I need to hold on to someone's hip immediately. As the internet started catching on to the odd patterns in Pedro's public appearances, the memes exploded. Fans began doing side-by-side photos of Pedro with different women at press events, all with the same body language. Relaxed smile, awkward hand placement, co-star leaning ever so slightly away. Joe Rogan played a clip of a red carpet interview where Pedro seemed to cling to a fellow actress for a few seconds longer than necessary. What is he doing? Joe asked, squinting at the screen. Is this his version of a fidget spinner? That's not nervous energy, that's comfort zone gymnastics. What made it worse, in Joe's opinion, was how quickly the Hollywood machine rushed to defend it. Articles popped up overnight talking about Pedro's gentle spirit, sensitivity, and how his touchiness was endearing. Joe rolled his eyes so hard it almost echoed through the studio. If I hugged every guest on my show because I was anxious, he said, they'd call the police by episode 3. Joe's co-host chimed in, laughing as they imagined Pedro Pascal on the set of The Mandalorian, walking around in full armor, nervously putting his hand on every crew member who walked by. I just need to touch the boom mic guy real quick, feeling nervous about today's shoe, Rogan snorted. At some point, it stops being anxiety and starts being a weird habit nobody wants to talk about. But Joe wasn't just roasting Pedro for laughs. He was highlighting the double standard. If this was anybody else, he said, they'd be trending for the wrong reasons. But Pedro, people say, oh, he's just a sweet soul. Please, if I did that on Fear Factor, they'd lock me in a room. Then Joe took it one step further. He talked about how Hollywood has built an image around certain stars that becomes bulletproof, no matter how strange their behavior gets. Pedro's been turned into this golden boy, Joe said. He can say the sky is green and people will call it art. He touches everyone at a press event and they say it's heartfelt. No, it's uncomfortable. Let's just call it what it is. Joe even brought up old clips of Pedro in interviews, pointing out how often he turned serious topics into drawn-out metaphors about emotion and vulnerability. He treats every question like it's a therapy session. How was it working on the movie? Well, I had to reach into my soul and find the anxious child within. What? Just say it was fun. As Joe continued, he got into the weird branding that comes with actors like Pedro Pascal. He's being marketed like a weighted blanket, Joe said. He's not just an actor, he's a feeling. Hollywood's selling this idea that Pedro is emotionally available, kind, deep, spiritual. Meanwhile, he's hanging onto his co-stars like a kid at a grocery store clutching his mom's leg. Joe also made a point about professionalism. If you're so anxious at work that you need constant physical contact to function, maybe take a step back. Nobody's saying you can't be nervous. Just maybe don't wrap yourself around every person near you like it's a therapy dog convention. And Joe didn't stop there. He addressed the people defending Pedro online, saying things like, he's Latin, it's cultural. Joe responded with his trademark sarcasm. Oh, I didn't realize cultural anxiety involved becoming a walking security blanket. That explains everything. Rogan also tackled the damage it does to others involved in those moments. People act like his co-stars love it, Joe said. You think Vanessa Kirby wanted to be clutched like a steering wheel during an interview? You ever watch their faces? It's like they're trapped in a hug they didn't RSVP to. The podcast rolled on and Joe kept roasting. He even compared Pedro to the Hollywood version of a nervous puppy. You ever see a dog during a thunderstorm? Just shaking, trying to sit on everyone's lap? That's Pedro on press day. Joe wrapped things up by delivering a brutal final jab. The guy's playing Reed Richards, the smartest man in the Marvel universe, and he can't handle a red carpet without leaning on someone like he's about to faint in a soap opera. If that's not ironic, I don't know what is. As fans clipped the podcast and shared Joe's commentary online, the conversation started shifting. What was once dismissed as endearing now had people asking, wait, why are we just brushing this off? Joe had cracked open the illusion, and suddenly, the nervous golden boy narrative didn't seem so solid anymore, and Joe didn't apologize for a word of it. Look, he said, you want to be emotional? Cool. You want to talk about your anxiety? I support that. But don't make it everyone else's problem, especially not in the middle of an interview where people are just trying to answer a question about the movie. Joe left his audience with one final thought. Pedro's not the villain, but maybe he needs to take a step back, stop overanalyzing every role like it's a college thesis, and remember, you're an actor. Your job is to pretend, not to make everyone around you carry your emotional baggage. And just like that, Joe Rogan turned Pedro Pascal's nervous habit into the biggest roast of the week. After Joe Rogan's roast gained traction online, the internet exploded with reactions. Clips from the podcast circulated everywhere. YouTube compilations, TikTok edits, even animated parodies. One trending post summed it up perfectly. Pedro Pascal's anxiety is now a shared experience for everyone in his personal space. The public had been tiptoeing around the oddness for months, but Joe's no-nonsense approach finally gave fans the green light to call it what it really was: awkward, unnecessary, and just plain strange. Hollywood insiders began whispering about the podcast episode behind closed doors. Some laughed it off, calling Joe typical Joe, but others, particularly those who had worked on sets with Pedro, reportedly nodded in silent agreement. Several entertainment blogs, without naming names, began posting anonymous crew accounts of Pedro's odd press tour energy. "We were told to make sure he felt supported," one source claimed, "but at some point it just felt like babysitting." Another wrote, "He couldn't sit through a panel without adjusting someone's mic, touching a sleeve, or leaning into someone's space." Rogan's roast sparked a new wave of analysis. People started rewatching old footage with fresh eyes. What used to be brushed off as charisma suddenly looked like behavior nobody knew how to question. "The charm wore off," Joe said in a follow-up episode. "People stopped laughing and started squinting." He even joked, "You ever meet someone who's so anxious they create anxiety in you? That's Pedro. He's a human mood swing." And as usual, fans on Reddit got to work. One thread titled Pedro Pascal, "Is this the behavior of a leading man or an emotional tornado?" racked up thousands of upvotes. Another compared Pedro's press tour behavior with co-stars who visibly leaned away from him in group photos. Joe highlighted this on his show. "I saw a montage where his hand slowly creeps up a co-star's shoulder like a slow-moving crab. It's like watching anxiety with fingers." Meanwhile, late-night hosts danced around the issue, too cautious to say it outright. One host cracked a line about Pedro Pascal, the only superhero who needs a support group to walk a red carpet. Joe, never one to hold back, replied on his podcast, "You want support? Bring a fidget cube. Don't bring a co-star and turn her into an armrest." But it wasn't just the public noticing. Industry professionals were now rethinking Pedro's future casting. According to reports from inside talent agencies, some casting directors began quietly removing him from consideration for roles with heavy promotional commitments. "It's too risky," one insider allegedly said. "We can't keep re-editing interviews to cut out the weird tension." Joe responded, "When studios are more nervous about you than you are about your own anxiety, maybe take a step back." And then came the Pedro defenders. A loud subset of fans flooded social media to argue Joe was being too harsh. "It's trauma," they insisted. "It's emotional intelligence." But Joe wasn't having any of it. "Everyone's got trauma," he said. "You know what I don't do when I'm anxious? Red carpet interpretive hugging." In another segment, Joe reacted to a viral video essay titled, "Pedro Pascal is the human hug we all need." He scoffed. "If this guy is a hug, he's the kind where you're not sure when it's going to end and your shoulder starts hurting." The studio laughed and Joe continued, "Let's stop pretending discomfort is wholesome just because it's coming from someone with soft eyes." Pedro, meanwhile, stayed silent publicly, but his Instagram told another story: moody captions, black and white selfies, vague inspirational quotes about connection and feeling seen. Joe mimicked the tone on his podcast. "When I feel anxious, I listen to wind chimes in the dark and then gently lean on the person next to me, whether they want it or not." His co-host cracked up. Pedro Pascal's Instagram reads like a scented candle trying to be a philosopher. As more footage surfaced, fans began pointing out that Pedro's behavior didn't seem to happen with male co-stars. "So wait," Joe said, "the anxiety only kicks in when he's next to women? That's oddly specific. Maybe it's not anxiety, maybe it's a selective comfort compass." That line hit hard, and suddenly the narrative began to shift from quirky to questionable. And the Fantastic Four fiasco only made things worse. Rumors swirled that Pedro's behind-the-scenes behavior had contributed to the breakdown of the project. Joe addressed this too. The guy walked into a superhero movie and turned it into a TED Talk about emotions. You're not writing a poem, buddy. You're stretching your arms and fighting villains. Joe even joked about Marvel's internal response. You know, someone at Marvel is flipping over tables. They thought they were getting their new Tony Stark. Instead, they got a grown man who needs emotional chaperones. It was brutal, but the audience loved it. The fallout continued. One event organizer reportedly issued a quiet request to Pedro's team ahead of a film festival appearance. Please ask Mr. Pascal to be mindful of personal space. Joe read that on air and nearly lost it laughing. Imagine needing a memo for that. It's like telling someone not to eat with their hands at a formal dinner. Meanwhile, Pedro's reputation was starting to look fragile. He still had defenders, of course, but casting momentum slowed. Rumors of upcoming deals fell quiet. As Joe put it, Hollywood is a lot like poker. The minute people think you're holding weird cards, they stop inviting you to the table. Joe also pointed out the irony of Pedro's acting choices. This guy keeps playing tough guys, post-apocalyptic heroes, galaxy bounty hunters, super genius scientists, but then he hits a red carpet and looks like he's one bad question away from needing a comfort llama. It wasn't just a burn, it was a reminder that public image and personal behavior don't always line up. And Joe brought up one last point that hit especially hard: trust. When you're working in a high-stakes industry like this, people need to feel safe around you, not unsure if they'll end up being your emotional crutch every time you feel nervous. He continued, nobody's saying you can't have feelings, just maybe don't express them by becoming everyone's unexpected shadow. As the episode wrapped up, Joe left the audience with a final jab. Pedro Pascal might be the first actor in history to turn a press junket into a support group. But here's the truth, people don't want their superhero to come with a therapy manual. They want a leader, not a Klingon. And with that, Joe sipped his coffee, shrugged, and leaned back in his chair. It's not personal, he said. It's just reality. Hollywood gave him the spotlight, but it turns out he brought a whole lot of baggage with him, and not the kind that fits in an overhead bin.